everybody, we are back. I hope you all had a dynamite Thanksgiving holiday. I know I did, and spending it with my beautiful wife and my 5-year-old crazy lady, my daughter. We had a great time, so I hope you all enjoyed Thanksgiving as much as we did. Wanted to go ahead and close out the movie chapter, so on Thursday we could move on to mass media law, mass media ethics, and get you to your last assignment before the final exam. First, before we get to the rest of the movie chapter, I did want to go ahead and talk about a couple of newsworthy items, of course. At the box office. Now, if you remember on your course outline, this is on your course outline. It's one of the websites that I provide called boxofficemojo.com. It is outstanding in showing you every day, but especially on the weekends when the movies are its busiest, how much money are made, what movies did well, which movies did not. So over the 5-day Thanksgiving weekend, which is a huge weekend for movie openings, and it's 5 days because they count Wednesday night, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. Encanto was the number one movie in America. It was in almost 4,000 theaters, and it made about $40 million. Now, that's not bad, except we're in COVID. We're still in an area where people are just not getting out to the movies yet. And to give you an example, I checked, as you can on Box Office Mojo, you can check out the all-time, and the all-time best weekend, 5-day weekend for Thanksgiving, was just a couple of years ago, Frozen 2, which made $125 million over those 5 days. And I think Encanto would have done pretty close had it not been the middle of this whole COVID craziness, especially because there are so many movies that are out that you could also watch at home. I was noticing that, Red Ticket, or Red Notice, with the one with Dwayne Johnson and Ryan Reynolds and Gal Gadot, is in theaters also in some areas, but I know that we watched it here at home, loved it, and I think it would be a much bigger box office hit if it was allowed to be just at the box office, but again with COVID. Although, again, I'm also all for, I am still all for what I was talking about over a decade ago, and that's the ability to have first-run films to be shown in your own home. That you would have the ability, again, hey, $20, $25, that's not bad if you're getting 2, 3, 4 people over. You can all get your own popcorn. You have your own bathroom facilities. You can pause without running out of the theater, peeing as fast as you can, and running right back into the theater. So $20 or $25 is not bad. But of course, if you have something like Netflix or one of these other, or Amazon Prime, if you're already paying for that and it's part of the package, then you're really lucky. So box office is way down. Let's see where this goes, if they're going to continue, as we hopefully will one day finally get out of this damn pandemic. Let's see if we can go back to what I would call normal, where all movies are just back in theaters, or if they continue to do continue to do what I think is just amazing, and that's you being able to watch these first-run films in the comfort of your own home. Like right now, I was looking at Box Office Mojo of the top 5 movies, and King Richard is out in theaters while also being on HBO Max. And that's the movie about Richard Williams, the father of Venus and Serena Williams, played by Will Smith. So it's going to be interesting to see. But the other big news was on Thanksgiving afternoon, okay? Football is always a big part of Thanksgiving. The NFL has been doing that since television began. Okay, and there was a game in the afternoon, started at 4:30, between the Dallas Cowboys and the Las Vegas Raiders. Right. It was the most watched regular season game in 31 years. Almost 40 million people tuned in to watch the Cowboys and the Raiders. Now the final tally is going to come in on tomorrow, on Tuesday. But it looks like it had almost 40 million people, which is just amazing. Again, television, when it comes to like the networks, which is ABC, NBC, CBS, Fox, or cable networks, where it's just so thinned out right now because of COVID and all your streaming services and everything else, whether it's Disney Plus and Netflix and Hulu and Prime and Tubi and Pluto. Wow. Dry throat. So when you have network television, and again, I've said it to you since the beginning of the semester, if there's one thing the network can rely on, and trust me, CBS made a lot of money on their advertising when it came to this Cowboy Raider game. They're going to have to rely heavy on it, on the NFL, because we had that one little blip, so to speak, where on the Paramount cable network, the Yellowstone, the show Yellowstone, the season 4 premiere with Kevin Costner, got 14.7 million people. But otherwise, Chicago Fire, Chicago Police, or whatever those shows are on NBC, or This Is Us, The Connors on ABC, they're not really drawing anything. Those network television shows aren't drawing anything, but the football is. And again, there were over 38 college football games that are on TV just on Saturday alone. It's amazing. Come 12 noon, I think I counted 11 were on just at 12 noon. It might even been more than 11. It's amazing how many cable channels you actually have. And I have YouTube TV, so it's still technically cable TV, but I have it through YouTube TV. How many damn games that were on? And it's because it's one of the only things, programming, that will make them money. Otherwise, if it's just regular old programming, except for if you're old people like me, you go over to Pluto TV, you watch the old shows, and like we said, Pluto TV made $1 billion in revenue a year earlier than they thought they would. So TV has changed forever, and it's going to be really interesting as we hopefully will get out of COVID to see where it goes. So now let's go ahead and finish the movies. Now, the last clip I showed you was, of course, the 1927 classic, The Jazz Singer with Al Jolson. We now have sound, and sound was the way to go. The problem was there were a lot of silent film stars who had horrible voices. Probably no one was worse than Mary Pickford, America's Sweetheart. Okay? She had the most annoying Brooklyn accent, so you couldn't put her on film with sound. And a lot of silent film actors, their careers ended when it came to sound. So what Hollywood had to do, we had to go find people who could talk. And of course, the first clip I show, one of the great classic movies of all time, rated the #2 comedy of all time, and that, of course, is Duck Soup by the Marx Brothers. And of course, the biggest reason is Groucho Marx could talk. Okay, and of course could make everybody laugh. I still laugh at that old black and white film every time I see it. And then, of course, we have the gangster movie became big, and you have a clip from James Cagney, probably the premier gangster movie star, especially as we came out into the 1930s. And one of the things you're now starting to see, as yes, sound is now applied to these films, is we're going into the Great Depression. And for those of you who follow your history, between 1929 and 1939, 1940 was a very dark time in our history because the Depression, people lost millions upon millions of dollars, billions of dollars actually. There were no jobs, there were no place to live, and then of course, to make matters worse, you had what happened in the Midwest, which was no rain, so you had what was called the Dust Bowl, and all these farms went belly up. People had to pick up from their farms and move. Most of them moved to California. It was pretty sad. It was a rough time, the Depression, in our nation's history. And where people would do is they would go in for an escape. And that's what the movies were. And it wasn't uncommon that on a regular basis, you would go ahead and you'd come home from work, eat dinner, and then you would walk to a theater to go watch a movie. You could do this 2, 3, 4 times a week. And most theaters were within walking distance of your home. Like, for example, you take places like Ridgewood. If anybody knows Ridgewood, New Jersey, where's the theaters? It's right in the center of town. The Westwood Theater, if you're from... Wow. Westwood, New Jersey, where... I'm good, people. I'm good. I just got a little dry throat. But if you're in Westwood, where's the Westwood Theater? It's right in the center of town. Okay, I remember North Arlington, the old Arlington Theater, right in the center of town, right on Kearny Avenue there. And that's, of course, before a lot of the other, this is the 1930s. So this was before a lot of the sprawl that we have today in those areas that I just mentioned. But plus there were also other theaters that are no longer exist today. Theaters that after television arrived went belly up and were destroyed and somebody built a house or a building there or something. But I remember one of the last ones is I lived in Fairlawn, and there was a theater. It only sat like 120 people, and it finally was demolished in like 2005. But it had been around since the early 1930s, and was just one of many theaters like that where, you come out of your house, we'll walk 5 blocks to the right, we'll go to this theater. And then a couple nights later, we'll walk 5 blocks to the left, and we'll go to that theater. And it became an escape. People needed to go to the movies. And what's more is Hollywood knew that people needed that escape, so they started to make things a little bigger and brighter. And that's why I have 3 clips from 3 classic movies from the late 1930s that were colorized. And now, color film was very expensive. And you're in the middle of the Depression, but they knew that it would draw people in. And of course, from 1938, you have The Adventures of Robin Hood with Errol Flynn. You have The Wizard of Oz, okay, with Dorothy, Judy Garland, and of course, the granddaddy of them all, Gone with the Wind, with Clark Gable and Vivian Leigh. You have the closing scene that I left you guys, and the color was amazing, especially if you look at both Robin Hood and The Wizard of Oz. See, we may not think of much of it now, but when you look at those film clips and you see the deep colors and the variety of colors, I mean, do you really think back in old England, back in the 1100s, every knight had completely different color schemes in their uniforms, that the bishop would have that deep dark purple? I mean, it was amazing. But they did that because they knew it would be eye-catching. And what's more is when people came in to see it, they would then go ahead and tell their friends. Or they would come back for more. And that's another thing. A lot of people came back for more. They would keep coming to watch. Because remember, there were no reruns. What's more, there was nothing else to watch at home. But if you saw something that was amazing, you kept going back for more. And it would only cost you 25 cents or 50 cents to get into the movies. But especially 1939 with Gone with the Wind. It was such a big epic and so colorful, and such a lot of money was spent on this. It was, at the time, the most expensive film ever made. But it also got the box office. Now, officially, it only did about $250 million at the box office. But adjusted for inflation, if you look at boxofficemojo.com, it is still the biggest money-making movie of all time, adjusted for inflation, that is. If the number of tickets sold were at today's prices, when people went to go see Gone with the Wind would have made $1.7 billion. And that's because people would not only go to see it, but they'd go to see it again and again and again. And what's more, because there was no television, it's not like today. Like you guys know, even pre-COVID, a movie comes out, and let's say it's in 3,000 theaters across the country. It stays there for only about 3 or 4 weeks, and then it starts to lose theaters gradually. And usually after about 3 months, 4 months, that movie's gone from theaters. Well, there is no TV, there is no streaming services, there is no 10 HBOs, 10 Cinemaxes, 10 Showtimes, 10 Stars, okay? Doesn't exist. So when a movie came out, if it was doing well, that theater owner's not taking it away. So you had movies staying in theaters for years. It's something I never saw except for one time, and I'll talk about it later on in this lesson. Excuse me. Man, dry throat. So anyway, so now, Gone with the Wind, biggest box office hit of all time, 1939. Boom. We now have the Winds of War. Things are happening over in Europe. Things are happening over in Asia. America is teetering, knowing that eventually we're probably going to have to get involved in this. So a lot of money now stops going into the production of films. Even though some of the greatest films of all time come out during the time leading up and during World War II, when you think of Casablanca, when you think of Citizen Kane in 1941, just strictly black and white, small scripts, well acted, but not a whole lot of production value in there because there wasn't a lot of money being thrown at movies at the time. As we not only got ready for war, but then during World War II. But once the war was ended, the movies were back in style. But what's interesting is, as we come back from the war, yeah, people were going to the movies. As a matter of fact, in 1946, a year after World War II, in America, we were selling 90 million movie tickets a week. Again, no television yet. Television's about to arrive, of course. But in 1946, there's no TV yet, so it was 3, 4, sometimes 5 days a week. It was a regular occurrence that, and again, it's because we love to be visually entertained. You'd come home from work, you'd eat dinner, you'd walk to a theater house. And again, there were so many of them that you could go to a different one every day of the week, and you would have different movies. But by 1950, we're now down to 60 million tickets a week. In 1955, we're at 46 million. So now you can see the power of television. Uncle Milty, Ed Sullivan, the Honeymooners with the Jackie Gleason, the great one. They're pulling people away from the theaters. Look at this, cut in half in just 9 years the number of tickets sold in America each week to go to a movie. So that meant the movies had to get bigger and better. In order to make money, you got to spend money. And that's why one of the clips that I showed you there is from the 1959 classic Ben-Hur, which is one of the biggest box office hits in American history. And they spared no expense. Of course, that's the famous chariot scene. A lot of money to, construct that set and have that chariot race and everything else. And again, you had to spend money to make money, and they succeeded. But what's more is you now had going to the movies become more of an event. Remember, people were doing this 5 or 6 times a week. It wasn't a big deal. But once now you were home, of course, the baby boom. You've got the baby at home. You're sitting watching TV. You got the small screen. You're seeing the same thing. Now I want to go to see a big screen with big sound. Again, movie theater houses. Movies were pouring all kinds of money to get you back in the theater. So you had the big colors. There was no color television not until the 1960s. So if you wanted to see something colorized, if you wanted to, if you're watching, it's 1954, you're watching The Wizard of Oz on television, you're seeing it in black and white. So if you wanted to see it colorized, you had to go to a theater. So theaters were now becoming more popular, especially, dinner and a movie. That's where that came from, was post-World War II. As the baby boom hit, going to the movies became an event. And then as we now enter the 1960s, one of the clips that I also included for you is the opening scene from one of the greatest films of all time, especially because now we're going to start crossing over, and that is the 1961 classic West Side Story, which won 11 Academy Awards. And of course, there's a remake that should be out very soon that was directed by Steven Spielberg. And the thing about it is that not only did you have people flock to the movies to go see West Side Story, and big screen, beautiful colors, the soundtrack sold like 12 or 14 million albums. So now you're going to start seeing movies, and a lot of them throughout the 60s did that. Dr. Zhivago, even like the Great Escape from 1962 had a soundtrack that sold millions of copies. So you had a real great crossover with the music to these movies, selling like hotcakes and having songs played on the radio. But also from the 1960s, one of the things that you've probably noticed up to this point is there aren't a lot of dark faces on the movie screen. Now, in Gone with the Wind, you did have Hattie McDaniel, actress, who ended up winning the Academy Award for Best Supporting Actress. So at least there were roles for African American actors and Hispanic actors. Of course, in the movie West Side Story, where it's the Sharks versus the Jets, so it's the American-born kids versus the Puerto Rican kids, you also start to get more roles for, and of course, Rita Moreno, one of the great actresses of all time, wins the Oscar for Best Supporting Actress in West Side Story. But one of the things that TV wouldn't touch, see, television was still, as we go through the 60s, was very bubblegum. It was very wholesome, a lot of censorship. Okay, some of the great censoring stories of all time is when in 1966 Jim Morrison and the Doors are going to sing Light My Fire, their big hit on Ed Sullivan, and they're asked to change their lyrics. Instead of saying, girl, you couldn't get much higher, girl, you couldn't get much better. And of course Jim Morrison famously looks in the camera and says, girl, you couldn't get much higher. And they were never asked to be on Ed Sullivan ever again after that. But anyway, one of the things you don't see on television is a lot of the social ills be addressed. Movies could do that, and they drew them in. One of the greatest movies I've ever seen is I've put a clip on there. It's from the 1967 classic, In the Heat of the Night. Excuse me, In the Heat of the Night, starring Sidney Poitier. And it's a fantastic story. I'm not going to tell you about it. I want you to read about it, and I want you to watch that clip because it's amazing to watch. It is an amazing clip to watch. It's probably my favorite clip from the movie. When you see suddenly the eyes open up on this sheriff down there in Mississippi. So I'll leave that there to you. But at least the movies were addressing a lot of our social ills where on television they really were, except for maybe the news. But otherwise, television shows, you still had shows like My Three Sons and Green Acres and, the Beverly Hillbillies. Hi, the Beverly Hillbillies. Everything's, like dee. But movies could address the social issues. Now, the final clip, because I couldn't go into everything. It would take me forever. Is an amazing clip also. It's the opening scene from the movie Star Wars from 1977. Now, for a lot of you, it means nothing. Okay, this is an old movie. You've seen this before. But this was the first time. See, science fiction, after the 1950s with the nuclear scare and everything else, science fiction had kind of died out. As a matter of fact, science fiction tried on television with a little show called Star Trek on NBC in the late 1960s. Got canceled after 3 seasons. So science fiction in the movies had really died out. But what happened was, Star Trek, although canceled after 3 seasons on NBC, was making a huge comeback in syndication. And that means, of course, it may not have been on NBC like every Wednesday night at 8 o'clock anymore. But now you could watch it 5 nights a week on Channel 11 when you came home after school or right before you ate dinner. And people loved it. And all of a sudden, Star Trek got this huge revival. And they were having Star Trek conventions. And all of a sudden, movie makers felt, you know what? I think people want sci-fi back. But if we're going to do sci-fi, we got to do it right. And what a young kid by the name of George Lucas does is he puts into this film in 1977 something called computer-generated imagery, or CGI. Okay? CGI was so important to the growth and the explosion of the sci-fi genre. And of course, after Star Wars with the computer-generated imagery, we've been there ever since. From all your Marvel movies, your DC comic movies, all the Star Wars and all of them, they're all big thanks to CGI or computer-generated imagery. It all started in 1977 with that one little movie that's still one of the biggest, one of the top 3, I think, biggest box office hits of all time. And that's Star Wars Episode 4. Remember, the 1977 one, the first one, is actually Episode 4. All right, people, that's the movies. I couldn't talk about everything. I'd be here until March. And you guys, the semester ends in December next month. So, there's your quiz. I need your quiz by Wednesday night, 8 p.m. It's right there on the quiz. So go ahead and get that to me. And please, take some time to watch these clips. These clips are amazing in the history of movies. And how movies developed and how what was it? How they, not aimed, but how they related to the audience they were shown to. And by the way, if you watch one Marx Brothers, you got to watch a lot of Marx Brothers movies. Just funny, funny guys. All right, y'all. I will see you on Thursday when we start talking about mass media law and mass media ethics.